Procrastination is the devil, and we're about to slay him. If you watch this video, extract the tactics that you're not currently using and implement them, you will become a billionaire. Well, probably not actually, that's pretty difficult, but you will get a lot more done and that will make you more money. But I know what you might be thinking. John, you're just some guy on the internet. Who voted you king of productivity? Well, nobody. This is a dictatorship. But here's the deal with this channel. I do the research so you don't have to, and then present you the summarized answers. So, make sure you're subscribed, and let's delve into the 7 best strategies to be insanely productive and kill procrastination. Productivity booster number 1. Chop it up. Look, we put things off for one simple reason. They sound hard. If you looked at your to-do list and the first item was go have some beers with your mates. I don't know about you, but I'm not procrastinating on that. Let's go do it right now, I'm all in. But normally our to-do list looks a lot scarier than that. Maybe you don't even have a to-do list and you've just got loads of different jobs swimming around in your brain. But here's what I can guarantee. The things that we put off the most are the big picture things. Like starting that business, building that side hustle, learning to code, getting better at public speaking. Or the one constantly on my to-do list, build an empire. Really must get round to doing that soon. Maybe tomorrow. Well, spoiler alert, we're never gonna get round to doing any of them. We're just not. And here's why. They're too big. Seriously though, they're way too vague. Where the hell would you even start with those? So, of course, because they sound horrible and scary and difficult, we're just gonna keep putting them off forever. And look, those examples are kind of extreme, but even on a smaller scale, if there are things that you want to do or know you need to do, but you keep putting them off and procrastinating, the reason is normally very simple. They're too vague, they're too big, and they're too daunting. Luckily though, the answer is actually pretty simple. We just need to chop those big tasks up into small little nibbles, bite-sized little chunks. So right now, whatever your biggest task is in your mind, whatever that means to you, just think about it for a second and ask yourself, what could you do in 10 minutes or less that would just put you a tiny bit closer to that? Just one step closer to completing it. And whatever that 10-minute or less task is, that's the task you need to do today. Because seriously, if I had in the back of my head that I want to build a business, well then, whenever I go to think of that, all these other questions just keep popping up like, well, what's it going to be called? What am I going to sell? What, I need a website? How do I market that? And so on, and a million other different things. So very quickly you're going to get overwhelmed and go, this is too much, and just move on to something else. You're going to keep procrastinating on that because it's too big, it's too vague, and you don't know where to get started. But if I say, well, what can I do in 10 minutes or less that's going to be the very first step in getting going with a business? Well, that would probably be making a list of different ideas of what the business could actually be. And that doesn't sound too bad. That sounds pretty achievable today. So again, the reason we procrastinate on things is because the jobs are too big and we need to chop it up into chunks that are much smaller and more manageable. And the more achievable they sound, the less resistance you'll have in doing them. So whenever you're procrastinating on anything, just remember the task you've got is clearly too big, so you need to chop it up into smaller chunks because getting started is the hardest bit. So you need to make getting started as easy as possible for yourself. And then of course you'll notice that surge in momentum every time you cross off one of those little tasks because it feels like you're getting more stuff done, and so that momentum then carries on and you get even more done. And if you're still struggling to get started, even when you've broken the task down into really, really small little jobs, well, here's a bonus tip for you. What you do is you count down from 10, and then on 1, you just dive right in. You just go for it. You just get started, whatever it is. And what this does is it forces you to not overthink all the reasons why you can't do it or why you don't want to do it. And so it sounds a bit mad, but honestly, I find that whenever you procrastinate on something and you really just don't want to do it, literally, start at 10, even say it out loud maybe, start counting down, and as soon as it gets to 1, you don't think about it, you just get going. Just do it. Dive in. And now, before we move on to point number 2, I just want to give a quick shout out to me. Yep, please subscribe to me. And I think the fact there is no other sponsor on this video apart from myself tells you that I really do need the subscribers. So if you are enjoying this video so far or finding it useful at all, please do consider joining the channel for lots more content like this. Anyway, on to productivity booster number 2. And that is, if you want to increase your productivity, you need to increase your self-care. By which I basically mean just looking after your mind and your body. Which is a bit of a contradiction because we normally imagine that if you're going to work more, you need to take time away from things like that. And so maybe you'd wake up and go, I'm not going to go to the gym today or play any sports because that's time away from working on my business. You know, an hour in the gym is an hour less to work on whatever project I'm working on. That is such a self-destructive and counterintuitive cycle to get into. And it may even work in the very short term, but in the long term, it is a recipe for disaster. And so if you want to be more productive and do more work and, most importantly, do better quality work, well, you need to scale your self-care routine accordingly. So what the hell does that look like? Well, as an example, let's say you've got a 9-to-5 job at the moment and you really want to get your side hustle up and running. And so you'd say that you're going to work an extra hour in the evenings after work to dedicate some time to it. But of course, by the evening, your productivity is pretty shattered. And so you just procrastinate and keep putting it off. And so here's where scaling self-care comes in. You say, okay, if I'm going to work an extra hour every evening, well, I need to add some extra self-care into my life to balance it out and counteract the extra stress I'm going to be putting on myself. And obviously that can mean a lot of different things, depending on what works best for you and helps you feel re-energized most. So maybe it means that you spend 10 minutes meditating every morning, or it means you book yourself a weekly massage. And I'll admit, when I was first thinking about this concept, I was like, there's no way any of this stuff is going to help me do more work or do better work. And then I delved deeper into the rabbit hole and realized that exceptionally busy and successful people dedicate an exceptionally large amount of time to their self-care. And that's simply because they know that putting time into that area of their life is going to give them better results when they are working, and so they'll get more done and it'll be better quality work. And so don't think of it as time away from being productive. Think of it as an opportunity to refuel so that when you actually do get back to your work, you'll be able to go harder and faster than would have otherwise been possible. And if you want even more evidence of this, think about students. I mean, I'm not going to generalize here, but when I was a student, I think it's fair to say I wasn't at my most productive. But I honestly think a big part of that was because my self-care routine was virtually non-existent. I was drinking lots of alcohol, I had no real sleep schedule, I was skipping the gym a lot, I had a pretty awful diet. No wonder my productivity wasn't very high. No wonder I often had that feeling of brain fog. No wonder students are notorious procrastinators when they have a self-care routine like that. The sharper your mind, the more productive you are and the less you procrastinate. And to sharpen your mind, you just need to scale your self-care. Simple as that. And you know, in self-development, people talk a lot about investing in yourself. But I think this is a nice reminder that that doesn't always have to be fancy classes or courses. It can be as simple as just looking after yourself properly to give yourself the best chance to feel good and succeed. And that brings us nicely onto productivity booster number 3, which is to dose yourself up on pills. Yep, get real drugged up. Sort of. What I'm actually talking about is supplements, which you may not have expected in a productivity video. But let me start this section by saying that most of the supplement market is an unregulated mess that will waste your money. And no, I'm not about to suggest some focus drugs either. But as we looked at in the last point, people often overlook the fact that how productive you are is often determined by how you're feeling, which can be physical factors as well as mental. And a recent realization I've had is how deficient large parts of the population are in important nutrients. And look, if you already have a brilliant diet, you know you're getting the nutrients you need, that's great, skip this point. But if that's not the case, or you're ever feeling a little bit run down and low energy, or like you've always got this lingering cold, well, it's possible that you might be deficient in a couple of things like I am, and so there could be a couple of supplements you could take to help with that. Now, they're definitely not miracle pills by any means, but they can give you that little bit of an extra boost. Again, do not go out and buy 10 random supplements that all promise you the world. Instead, do some research yourself, ideally talk to your doctor, and I'm just going to give you a couple of potential recommendations that might be worth looking into. Firstly is vitamin D, because if like me you're in a country where in winter you see very little sunlight, well then it's quite likely that you are deficient in vitamin D, which can definitely affect your mood and how you're feeling. I mean, why do you think goths and emos are so miserable all the time? Lack of sunlight, lack of vitamin D. But seriously, boost your mood and you boost your productivity. Another supplement that's often recommended to people is vitamin C, because if you start getting the symptoms of a cold, often taking vitamin C seems to quicken the whole process and get it out of your system faster, which is obviously very important for productivity, because when you've got that feeling of just being run down, so hard to get your best work done. So the sooner you can get that over with, the better. So that's another one that could be worth looking into if you think you might be deficient. Now, of course, ideally get all your nutrients from whole food or a product like Huel, which I've talked about before and we'll link in the description below. But if that isn't realistic for you and you know you're a bit short on something, well, these supplements can help a little bit just to make sure you're giving your body what it needs and giving it the best chance to be as productive as it's capable of. And the easiest way to track all of this is just to download a free app where you enter the food you've had for the day and it will tell you what nutrients you've got. So just do that for a week maybe with all the different meals you normally have, and then you'll get a good idea of what you may be lacking. Now, let's move away from health and on to the next point. Because productivity booster number 4 is to create a reward or a punishment. And that's simply because some people are motivated more by reward and some are motivated more by punishment. So you need to figure out which one suits you best. For example, are you more likely to get something done if you know that after you complete it, you'll be able to go out and do something fun that you really enjoy and want to do? Or are you more likely to get something done if you know that if you don't complete it, well, then you'll owe your friend some money? Surprisingly, more people seem to take action when it's the punishment option, when we're worried about losing something rather than gaining something. But you can test both out and see what works best for you. And obviously it will depend on what the reward is and what the punishment is. But of course, when you've got something riding on the result of you completing the task, it's going to increase the chances that you do it because there's something tangible at stake. So, if there's something you need to get done, set yourself a reward that you'll get after you complete it, or tell your friend that if you don't get it done, you'll buy in the first round of drinks next time you see them. So this really isn't complicated, and it doesn't need to be anything elaborate, but it 100% works. Because when you gamify it a little bit and hold yourself accountable, you're just much more likely to get it done. Productivity booster number 5, become an organization ninja. Like we said all the way back in point number 1, if you're overwhelmed by something, it's very unlikely you're going to be able to do it. So you need systems in place to help reduce that feeling of being overwhelmed. And the more organized you are, the more productive you're gonna be. And the simplest starting point for being more organized is just having a to-do list of the tasks you actually need to do rather than keeping things in your head all the time. And I realize that sounds really basic, but I'm a big believer that to-do lists work, and having it all clearly written down and visually there in front of you, that alone could make a big difference in helping you get started with things and realizing what you need to do and how you're going to tackle it. But then take it a step further and give yourself self-imposed deadlines for each of the tasks on the list, because it's human nature to leave things right up until the deadline before we do them. But the problem is, if you've got tasks on your list that don't really have a natural deadline, well, that just means you're very rarely going to ever get round to doing it. So you need to set a deadline yourself. And ideally link that deadline with the whole reward punishment thing we were just talking about, so there's some meaning behind the deadline and there's some actual urgency to it. But then if you want to take things a step further again and become a real organization ninja, turn your to-do list into a schedule. So you've already written down the end times, the deadlines of when you need to complete each task by, but instead map out exactly when you're going to start each thing and then schedule in breaks as well. Because if you just sit down with a big list of jobs to do, well, then your productivity is going to go like this. It's just going to keep going down over time because you haven't given yourself a break, and so you eventually burn yourself out and then you have no motivation at all to come back to it. Whereas you'll be much more organized and productive if you give yourself a bit of a timetable, so you know what you're working on. You know, I'm going to start at this time, but then I'm going to give myself a break here. And keep those breaks quite regularly, on-off work, rather than trying to do big continuous stints of work, which, as I said, is just going to burn you out, and you're going to be more productive. Even if you can push on and keep going, you're not going to be doing your best work. So it's about getting a little bit of a schedule for yourself so it can keep you on track and keep you productive. Plus, the more structure you have, the more productive you'll feel. And so the less you'll procrastinate, the more you'll get done. Productivity booster number 6, be nicer to yourself. That's a weird one for productivity, right? But when it comes to this topic, I think people are quite harsh on themselves sometimes. I know a lot of people who see themselves as a big procrastinator, and that mindset almost holds them back a bit. Remember, everyone procrastinates sometime. Don't beat yourself up over it, because that's definitely not going to help. And so when you have that realization of, oh wait, I'm really procrastinating on this thing right now, just take a step back for a minute and realize this does happen to everyone. Sometimes days just don't go to plan, but that's okay. You know what to do. So it's just about those baby steps to keep improving and keep building that productivity up. Because the other thing is that sometimes when we're procrastinating on something, it's just because we really, really hate it. It's not just because we're a bit unproductive and feeling a bit unmotivated. It's that the core of what we have to do, we genuinely really don't like. And so in that case, the bigger question might not be, how do I force myself to do this? It might be more of, how do I change what I'm doing in the first place? I realize that's beyond the scope of this video and an entirely different problem, but give yourself a bit of credit sometimes. It's not always your fault. Don't beat yourself up. It's just human nature that we want the easy route, and so we have to slowly train ourselves and build this stuff up. The fact you're watching this video and taking these steps to improve yourself is already way ahead of what most people are doing. So give yourself a little bit of credit. And also remember that just because you've struggled with procrastination in the past doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. You are not a procrastinator, you're just someone who has procrastinated in the past, like everyone else. So keep working on it and don't let that hold you back. Productivity booster number 7. You want to kill procrastination? Kill the distractions. Now, that doesn't mean that next time someone distracts you, you should kill them. I don't approve of that. But I do approve of you killing the chance of it happening again. So maybe that means putting your phone on Do Not Disturb mode while you're working, or telling the people around you that you really need to focus on this for the next however long and asking them please not to bother you for that time. And it's a similar thing with distractions like social media and email. If you find yourself drifting over to them a lot of the time, which, let's face it, most of us do, they're addictive, well, pretend you're back at school where you used to have certain websites that were blocked that you weren't allowed to go on. Get apps and, tools for your browser that can help block them out. Because if you actually shut off the distractions, you don't have that option anymore. It sounds a bit extreme, but, there are things like Forest for your phone or Stay Focused for your browser, which cut off your ability to use those time-wasting sites, and so it forces you to be more productive. In fact, I actually think this is one of the most important points for beating procrastination, and so I made some specific dedicated videos on the topics of being more focused and which specific apps and tools you can use completely free that will help you do this. And so for me personally, these had a massive impact, and I do believe they can for you too. So by all means check them out, and I'll hopefully see you there. Cheers.